Hello and welcome back to the Stitch Create Love YouTube channel. A slightly shorter video today, but I'm going to show you, following on from the last tutorial that I did, how to close the gap once you've finished knitting your German short row heel and you want to rejoin the heel or join the heel to the front of your sock. So if you've got one of my patterns, what I tell you to do is I tell you to pick up 2 stitches here in the gap between the heel and needle 1, and then another 2 stitches here in the gap between needle 1 and needle 2. And sometimes, particularly if you're a beginner knitter, it can be quite difficult to work out what you should be picking up and what you should be leaving alone. There aren't really any hard and fast rules about it, as long as it looks okay. And even if it doesn't look okay and you end up with a little hole in the corner of your gusset where you're going to be joining here, then you can always get a darning needle and some yarn at the end of your project and you can just make it look okay at the end. So don't worry too much about it. The more you do this, the easier it will get and the better your finish will be. So we finished working our German short row heel. And I'm just going to show you what that looks like, because there is a slight difference in tension when you're making German short rows on a purl row and on a knit row. I'm not sure you can see it terribly well here. But when you're making your German short rows on your purl row, they will be slightly tighter than when you're making them on your knit row. So when you come to knit them back in, you'll find that you have slightly less of a gap going up the side of your heel on one side than the other. That doesn't matter, that's exactly how it's supposed to be. You can see here, that's of course where we started the heel and that's where we finished the heel. So now we're ready to knit on needle 1 again. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to pull out our back needle because we're working in magic loop, and we're going to bring it around so that we can start working the stitches on needle 1. I'm just going to pause here so that I can zoom in nice and close for you so that you can see exactly what I'm doing. So I'm hoping that you're going to be able to see what I'm doing here. Now, there are different ways of doing this. Some people will pick up the legs of previous stitches here, and that's fine if that works for you. What I tend to do is I turn it over and I look at the back, and it's quite obvious to me, if I just get in there to show you, that there is one loop here that wants to be picked up, one here, and there's another one here that wants to be picked up. If you're using one of my patterns and you're using a contrast colour for your heel and then a different colour for the main body of your sock, you're picking up one stitch in each of those colours. So those are the ones that I think want to be picked up. So I'm going to pop those onto my needle 1. And in the pattern instructions, it tells you to pick them up and twist them as you do so. Now, if you look at these stitches on here, they're not currently twisted. They look like a yarn over. So in order to twist them, I'm just going to move them back over to needle 2. And then I'm going to come in from the other side so that they're twisted like this. So can you see now that those stitches are twisted around that needle? So that means that when I knit into the front of them, it's going to close the gap that would have been created if I hadn't twisted them. If that's far too complicated for you and you just want to put the stitches onto your needle, I'm going to untwist them for a minute so that you can see. If you just want to have them on your needle not twisted, then what you can do is you can knit through the back of the loop of those, and then that will close the gap. But the pattern will tell you to twist them. So I'm going to twist them. So let's just put them back onto needle 2 and then twist them to put them on needle 1. And then your pattern tells you to continue in pattern on needle 1. And you can see here that I'm going to be knitting to marker. So I'm going to knit those 2 stitches. I'm going to join in my main yarn colour again. For the time being, I'm not going to cut the tail of my contrast yarn. I just find it easier to work round before I cut it, just so that everything is a little bit tighter. So I'm going to knit those 2 stitches first of all. I'm going to join in my main yarn colour again, which is here. So I'm knitting those 2 stitches. I'm going to drop my tail. I'm not going to weave my end in as I go on this round. I'm going to wait, and I'm going to do it in a couple of rounds time, just because everything will be a little bit tighter then. But I am going to use my left hand just to keep hold of that tail. I'm going to knit my next stitch, and then I'm going to continue in pattern all the way to the end of needle 1. So I'm just knitting to my marker, and then I'm going to do what my pattern tells me to do. You can see there that this is already looking a bit loose, so I'm just going to pull it to tighten it up, and we will sort that out eventually. So I'm going to knit across here now until I get to the other side. Okay, so I've worked across the front of my sock. I've just come to the last 2 stitches here, so I'm going to knit those because that's what I need to do as per my pattern. And see this here, this is quite loose now because that is the tail of our main yarn colour that we cut when we started working the heel. So we're just going to pull that to make it nice and tight. Okay, and I'm going to move that out of the way. A good way to get rid of your ends, to manage your ends whilst you're still working, is just to tuck them down inside your sock so that they're not in the way. So I'll just tuck those away for you. And then we need to do exactly the same again as we did this side. We need to pick up 2 stitches, and we're going to pop them onto what was needle 1, because we've moved all of our stitches over from needle 1 onto needle 2. Okay, so let's have a look here. So again, we're looking for 1 in our main yarn colour and 1 in our contrast yarn colour. If I just move that up, can you see I've got 1 there and I've got 1 there? So I'm going to pick those 2 up. I'm going to use needle 1 here, like this and like this, to pick up those stitches. And you can see this one is already twisted because of the way that I've picked it up, and I will untwist it just to kind of show you that. Yeah, okay. So you need to make sure that the stitches are twisted before you knit into them. See if I can untwist that to show you. There we go, it's untwisted now. So I want to make sure they're twisted. If it's not twisted, I'll just knit into the back of the loop. So take it off and twist it, and then knit into it. Just pull your yarn nice and tight. And then we're going to knit into this one, which is already twisted. And then in order to make that nice and tight, what we need to do is find the end that we wove in when we joined our contrast yarn for our heel, and just pull it nice and tight just to close that gap. And then you're going to just continue to knit across the back of your sock, or whatever your pattern tells you to do. And when we come round next time, we're going to decrease the 2 stitches that we've just added. So we're going to decrease 1 stitch on the next round, and then we're going to decrease the 2nd stitch on the following round, and that's how we'll get back to the count that we want. Now, as you are knitting this, you might find that things do get a little bit loose, and the way to rectify that is just to make sure that you keep pulling your ends nice and tight as you go, and then you should end up without any gaps here when you finish your sock. I hope that's helpful. Thanks for watching.